Support for this episode of Judaism Unbound comes from the Oshman Family JCC in Palo Alto, California, whose vision is to be the architects of the Jewish future. The Oshman Family JCC empowers you to experience Jewish paths toward a life of joy, purpose, and meaning through innovative Jewish learning and wellness programs, community building, and initiatives to develop the next generation of Jewish leaders. Learn more at www.paloaltojcc.org. This is Judaism Unbound, episode 380, Summer Camp B Mitzvah. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And we are excited to continue our ongoing unit of episodes exploring the past, present, and future of the B Mitzvah. Our guest today is Meg Adler, who oversees B Mitzvah programming for Camp Tawanga. Just a last-minute reminder of our Shavuot Live program, which, if you are listening to this on Friday morning, is about to start at noon Eastern Time, or if you are already listening to this and it's after noon Eastern Time on Friday, you have until noon Eastern Time on Saturday to just hop on and register and come to some of the festivities, because it is a 24-hour experience of learning for the Shavuot holiday. And I think of it as more than learning, because the tradition is to stay up all night learning Torah on Shavuot, but I feel like Shavuot Live is something beyond that. It's learning Torah if that's what you want it to be, but I also think it's about experiencing revelation again in a new way, almost starting to imagine the new Torah that we need for our time, which itself is a Jewish tradition, right? The rabbis imagined that there was an oral Torah given at Mount Sinai, and we might imagine that there is even more Torah being revealed on Mount Sinai, and we are all there together to start to experience that new Torah. There are incredible presentations that happen in Shavuot Live. There's also this incredible conversation going on among the attendees in the chat that we really think is itself a special experience of revelation, and we hope that everybody who's listening to this will hop in and join us at Shavuot Live. So to do that, just go to judaismunbound.com/Shavuot 2023, and you can register and you'll get the link to hop on Zoom. We already have nearly 1,000 people registered for the event, so we would be excited for you to be participant number 1,001, or perhaps number 1,500. Who knows how many people are going to sign up for this before you listen to this. And if you are listening to this after Saturday at 12 noon Eastern Time, you will be able to access the recordings of Shavuot Live within a few days of the event. So just head over to the Judaism Unbound website, and you will find the links to each of the hours of the Shavuot Live experience in just a few days. And now let's dive into this conversation about the B Mitzvah with Meg Adler, the Associate Director of Bay Area Programs for Camp Tawanga, which is a Jewish summer camp located near Yosemite National Park, and a camp that is known as an extremely creative Jewish summer camp. As I mentioned, Meg Adler oversees the B Mitzvah programming at Camp Tawanga, and we're excited to jump into this conversation about what does it mean for a summer camp to have B Mitzvah programming. Meg Adler is a former Camp Tawanga camper, staff member, and supervisor. She served on Camp Tawanga's summer staff from 2012 to 2017 in various roles, including Jewish program assistant, and for 3 years as its counselor and specialist in training supervisor. In 2018, Meg Adler received a Master's of Religion from Yale Divinity School, and she also has a certificate in Jewish education for adolescents and emerging adults through Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. You can find Meg Adler's blog on Substack at Turnit, and she is currently working on a book that serves as an introduction to Torah that is human, conversational, funny, and honest. It looks at the Torah as a historical document as well as an ancestral heirloom. We're excited to read that book when it comes out, and we are excited to talk to Meg Adler now about the Summer Camp B Mitzvah program at Camp Tawanga. So, Meg Adler, welcome to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Oh, it's very fun. Okay, so here's my question. How is this B Mitzvah different from all other B Mitzvahs?
So, Camp Tawanga is a residential Jewish summer camp right outside of Yosemite, and we've been operating for coming up on 100 years. And our B'nai Mitzvah program started about 8 years ago with conversations with our community. When we were approaching our 90th anniversary as an agency, Jamie Simon, our then really leader of the agency, went on a listening tour with our community and said, where do we want to be at 100? She talked to a lot of families, and more often than not, she heard that folks wanted a way to bring the Jewish that kids experience at camp, quote, down the mountain, right into the Bay Area, and keep that kind of magic, that connection to nature, that really open tent Jewish around them as they become B Mitzvah. So this is a camp-inspired B Mitzvah process.
And so help me understand the logic behind the whole thing. So is the idea that most of the time, you don't have to confirm, by the way, some of the things that I say, but conceptually, most of the time, these kids, the Judaism, the Hebrew school, the synagogue, it's not so great, it's not so exciting. But camp, wow, I love camp. So somehow it would make sense that if their major milestones in life could happen at camp, that would be the Jewish place that really matters to them. But their birthday is in March, and so they can't have their B Mitzvah at camp. And so somehow there's a notion of, well, what would it be like if camp could somehow infuse the rest of the year? And this is one example. Is that the approach?
That's exactly right. Camp can't, and camp shouldn't exist year round, or else it wouldn't be camp, right? It needs to be this sacred retreat, which I know I've heard you all speak about in the past, actually, on this podcast, this need for retreat, this need for moving into the woods and being together in a brand new built society every single year, right? We build our society at camp. So the question is, how do we bring that society that we build at camp to the religious school experience, right? To the B'nai Mitzvah experience. And what you're saying about, kids that come to camp and that's really where they thrive. A lot of our kids at camp also thrive at synagogue. But what we found is there's a large population, and we know this, that a lot of kids are struggling in synagogue. And a lot of parents are struggling to make that connection. And so this is just another option for kids to make sure that they feel like they're held in B Mitzvah. So our program is a 2-year program starting generally for kids entering 6th grade. And it consists of multiple elements. The first is monthly classes outside. We try and make them as nature inspired as possible. So in that way, we're really bringing in the nature aspects of Camp Tawonga, is even just in our setting and how we interact with our environment. We have 7 classes throughout the year on weekends for 2.5 hours. So 1 per month from October through April. And these classes are a mix of camp-style games, camp-style tefillah, a prayer service. And we learn kind of gently 1 prayer at a time, each class. And they're additive. And so students are able to start with a 1 prayer service. And by the end, they're doing a 7 prayer service. And so our approach is very kind of gentle, and we make no expectation. We have no expectations that students come with any previous knowledge, which is also really sweet for kids who have never had any organized Jewish learning before. So in the first year, we focus on blessings and accompanying values. So for example, with Ve'ahavta and You Shall Love, we talk about loving the stranger, Ahavat Ger. Who is the stranger? Is the stranger the immigrant? Is the stranger the new kid at school? Is the stranger the unhoused person, especially here in the Bay Area? We really try and help kids look out into the world and see what's really happening here in the Bay Area, with the unhoused population being just so dramatically high and increasing. So that's the first element of the program, is the classes. And in the second year, we focus on kind of Torah literacy. What is the Torah? How does it work? And what are some key stories? How do we read Torah different than how we read any other book? So that's the class structure. We also have adult learning. So every month we have an adult learning session for year 1 parents and year 2 parents. So they get 7 classes each year as well. And this is really intended to bring parents into the fold and make sure they're on their learning journey as well. So over half of our families, way more than half, are some version of not every parent is Jewish. I hesitate to say interfaith because I think sometimes they hesitate to say interfaith. It's more just that the family has a different formation. Not everyone's Jewish. And so we have these classes to really bring in the family. This is a B Mitzvah program, but really a B Mitzvah program is a family program. There's no world in which a kid is just doing this on their own, and the family isn't deeply involved. And so we offer classes anywhere from what is the Torah, what is Shabbat, to how do you write a blessing for your child for their B Mitzvah service. So even like writing workshop type classes. Recently, we finished our program and the final classes were, how do you create a Jewish home? What does it mean to have a Jewish home? And what's next for you? So now that you've graduated, you might be thinking about other programming. You might be thinking about taking a break from programming. And so how can we support you and get you hooked into other organizations here in the Bay Area?
This is for the kids or the parents or both?
This is for the parents, and they're all online sessions, and we record them all and make them available as well.
So I love that outline that you're giving us. And for sure, I'm really interested and invested in the fact that this is a family experience that parents are also learning. And we're going to come back to that. I do know that this experience, I mean, when I had a bar mitzvah, and I think when many people had their B mitzvahs, it was mostly like a thing I did as me, interfacing with my rabbi and with my tutor that were adults. It was not really me with other kids. I think I actually had a fairly good experience with my bar mitzvah in the grand scheme, which is not always the case at all. But I would have had a better experience, I think, if it was more of a cohort experience. So I'm kind of curious, because I know you have some retreat elements that I'm sure, especially because you're Camp Dewanga, like you're good at running retreat experiences. I'm curious what those look like, and also to start to get a window into what sort of the capstone moment where people have a ceremony mark this transition moment, what some of those look like, because I know it's very much different on a camper by camper, student by student, child by child basis.
Yeah, so you are right that what we do best is camp. So twice throughout the year, in the fall and in the spring, we have our Shabbaton weekend. We have a one night overnight. We try and sleep outside, weather permitting. And we have a camp style Torah service. We have all of the same camp tunes that we would do up at camp. We have our own prayer book, and we have a really interactive service, lots of singing, lots of call and response. And then we move into just really community-based play and learning. We have electives and floats, anything that you would see at any camp. So arts and crafts, board games, basketball, etc. And then we have a Jewish learning rotation in the afternoon. So kind of like a classic retreat structure. We end with a big campfire, a talent show, s'mores, hashkivenu, our nighttime prayer for protection. We end with our classic camp tunes, and it really does bring camp into the Bay Area. In terms of the ceremony itself, which we call the simcha, it is very much choose your own adventure, which is what we say at camp a lot. And what we try to do throughout the program is prepare kids to know core blessings that would be part of the prayer service that we do up at camp, right? And throughout the program. So that way they are getting some training. One thing, we don't require Hebrew. So kids can be looking at either the transliteration or the Hebrew on the page. And some families choose to hire a service leader, like contract a service leader, and work with them to create an outline for their service. But we offer a Torah that they can borrow. We have a Torah that is through the Czech Memorial Scrolls Trust and was actually shipped to us DHL wrapped in bubble wrap. So that was kind of fun. We all got it, and we had a big Torah parade around the office when it arrived. We offer an ark. We have our prayer books. So we have like some materials for folks. We also have a curated list of service leaders in the area that folks can choose from, and we can help match them with, but they do hire them on their own. And we're there to really guide the process and help them piece together what they want to do. Because while some people will want to kind of recreate like a classic synagogue Torah service, but maybe outside, right? A lot of folks will like rent space outside in a public park or in some sort of nature-centered venue. I've also had students who have gone on a beautiful hike with their family and just celebrated that they've completed the 2-year program. They might offer their Devar Torah to their family at the top of the hike. I have had kids do a rafting trip, and then after the rafting trip with their friends, they have a short service literally on the side of the river. I've even had families where the program is the standalone. We ask kids in the second year to complete a very robust community service project. And then they have a graduation ceremony and they give a short speech about their mitzvah project. And so I have families where that's the culmination. The majority of families do want their student to have some Torah service, but not all. And that's part of why it's the choose your own adventure.
So I have a question that's not a what question, like what do you do? I think you've given a really comprehensive, helpful overview there. But I kind of have a question. It's part rhetorical question. It's part direct, real question. But like, I guess it's strange to me that the default for most of our Jewish world is that the coming of age ceremony for people usually that are 12 or 13, I mean, there's other ages too, but when that's the central most common one. It's weird to me that the place where that happens most frequently is an institution, the synagogue, that, yes, serves children, but it also serves lots of other people. It's like a generalist organization that is hopefully good at reaching a wide variety of age ranges. But it seems to me like if in any other respect we were creating a meaningful ritual for 12 and 13-year-olds, we'd say, who are the organizations that specifically work with those people and are really good at it? And we'd put it in their hands. And camps are that. Camps are mostly places that serve people between, I'm going to make up a lower age bound of, let's throw out 7, 8, or 9, and a upper age bound of usually headed off to college. And sure, there's counselors, there's people there that are adults, but there are spaces that are specialists in meaning making for children and, young adults, middle grade, etc. So I guess I'm kind of curious from your perspective if like Tawanga is modeling something that lots and lots of camps should be doing, or maybe not just camps, like other organizations that, youth groups, I don't know, like to me, it feels like, why wouldn't we treat that as the reality? And the answers I have, I'm unfortunately kind of cynical about. I feel like we think it's supposed to be in the synagogue because that's like the real place. Like if this is a transitional moment where, kids, quote, become big kids or adults or whatever we think is happening, they're becoming able to function in a synagogue. I'm not so satisfied with that answer. Help me out. Why might camps and other youth-focused organizations, why might we better understand them not as like alt B Mitzvahs, but kind of the logical place where this would be happening?
Oh, such a good question. We are kid experts. I work with middle school and I have been working with middle school for the bulk of my career. I think I'm more an expert in middle school than I even am in Torah. Like I love Torah. Torah is my career, my life, but like middle school is very particular, right? It's very nuanced. I think so much of it is their feeling of personal connection to each other, but also to the staff. And to have a staff that understands how youth work, right? And that when they're squirming in their seats, they can't keep listening. Like you have to stop the service. You have to ask them to get up and run around, right? Like you have to have a program that works for this age group and is like really human-centered, youth-centered. The answer is yes, we need people who really understand youth. And I think that the obvious places that serve youth as their mission, right? That is their expertise. I also am thinking about how Torah in the ancient times was read in the marketplace, right? This idea that it wasn't read in synagogue, there's no synagogue, right? But it was brought to the people, right? Like, where are the people? They're in the marketplace. Or even this idea of like Ezra reading Torah out loud to the people. This idea that we have to bring people to the Torah instead of Torah to the people, right? Where are the kids? They're at summer camp. Okay, there they are already. Like, why don't we introduce them to B Mitzvah in their natural habitat where they're comfortable?
There's an answer to that question, why we don't do it in the place where they're most comfortable, which is not to be like super cynical about it. I don't want to put you in the position where you have to agree with my cynical and controversial claims, but this isn't actually something that I made up. This is something that we discussed in our episode of Judaism Unbound with Isa Aaron, that the B Mitzvah kind of emerged in the mid-20th century synagogue as, again, not cynically, although there were meetings about it, but as kind of a way to get people to join synagogues by having increasing requirements for a B Mitzvah, by having the B Mitzvah be an increasingly important event. And so before that, and people don't know this, before that, the B Mitzvah was a big nothing. I mean, you went up to the Torah and said a blessing, and that was it, at best.
Yeah.
And you didn't even have to have that because the B Mitzvah is effectuated simply by waking up in the morning of your 12th birthday or your 13th birthday. And so the thing is that this thing emerged in the synagogue world, and it really was about concerns that synagogues had. Some were economic, but some were spiritual. I mean, they thought, I think that they sincerely thought that this was a good thing for all kinds of spiritual reasons, but they were never experts in working with middle graders. And so when we realize this, let's say 50 years later, and we say, actually, you know what? It makes a lot more sense for the B Mitzvah to be a program of camps rather than of synagogues. There's a way in which that seems totally obvious, and there's a way in which, in the real world that we live in, that is very difficult because there's a set of institutions that have a sense of ownership over this and have kind of convinced themselves and others, again, not maliciously, just kind of that's how it happens. Everybody's kind of convinced like a B Mitzvah belongs in the synagogue. I guess it feels to me like I'm curious how you think about, maybe it's not just the B Mitzvah, but it's also the whole world of working with Jewish young people. Like, why are we having the synagogues do that when their expertise actually is probably working with adults?
Well, I have so many responses to that, Dan. The first is love the Issa Aaron episode. Totally revolutionized my thinking on B Mitzvah. I recommend all of the families in my program watch it. It's on our reading/listening list of self-guided learning. And I've listened to it maybe every couple years or so. I think it's been out for several years just to refresh my mind on her points between kind of folk and elite Judaism. Okay, so I think, sure, it may be how B Mitzvah emerged might have been in this more, call it for what it is, maybe like a business approach to synagogue. However, I would say it has also turned into a really beautiful way to be in touch with ancestry. And I would say that I had a wonderful B Mitzvah experience where my dad became bar mitzvah and where my cousins became B Mitzvah. And in a way, there is that kind of thing that has happened that even maybe it didn't start in the way we might think is an ideal, pure sense. I do think there is this sense of belonging to a particular place that a synagogue can't afford, that, a choose your own adventure might struggle to offer. So I've had families generations back have stood on the same bima, read from the same Sefer Torah scroll, and there is a great sense of lineage. So I do think that is an incredible outgrowth of the synagogue B Mitzvah and not to be overlooked. And this idea of that being the only way it has to be, right? So too with so many Jewish rituals, we all, we're reinventing things all the time. It should stay a robust option for families where that feels really connective for them to be in that ancestral space and have that kind of structure. I do not think it needs to be the only or even the default option. And what's been really interesting to see is families who have one kid who becomes B Mitzvah at synagogue, one through our program, and then the third is still deciding or maybe doing a private tutoring option. To me, that's like the beauty of it, right? And I talk to families, I try and say, look how creative we can be with Pesach. Look how creative we can be with Seders and how we reinvent them every year. Well, some families maybe not, but some families do. Why not with B Mitzvah? Why do we get so rigid when it comes with B Mitzvah? And we just say to the professionals, tell me what to do, right? But with other things in our life, we feel much more ownership over. What if we took a Pesach approach to B Mitzvah, right? What if we actually got creative and knew we could own it?
And do they give you an answer, by the way? Like when you ask that question, like, do you know what? Do you understand why? Because I'm not sure.
I think there's a fear of expertise, like fear like they don't understand. Whereas Pesach, they've been doing their whole lives. They saw their grandfather do. They knew they could change it. No one's watching. But I think with B Mitzvah, there's this sense of, I hope I'm not doing it wrong. And I think that's something I'm trying so hard to free, like literally liberate my families from, that you're not doing it wrong. There is no like Jewish God police that's going to drop down and be like, foul, right? Like this is your ritual. Like you get to do what you want to do. And I want to empower you to do that, which is a big reason why we have such robust adult learning and why I really want this to be a family experience and not just a kid experience, because for the parents to take the reins and then to teach their kids that you can take the reins of your Jewish life, if not even one of the biggest moments of your Jewish life, not just every once in a while make a different Shabbat experience, but like when you become an adult in the Jewish community, you get to design that. That's one of the most empowering messages you could send a young Jewish person. Again, synagogue has an amazing structure and can really hold you through this process. But what I think the Tawanga B'nai Mitzvah program does is it's challenging families to like take control of your own Jewish life.
So that's really, really powerful. I want to, I don't know if this is a circle back or a circle forward or some kind of circle. I want to talk Devar Torah. I want to talk about like when I work, I've only done this a little bit. When I've worked with B Mitzvah students, I've referred to it as a Jewish hot take. That's my translation of Devar Torah.
I love that.
I actually think that's roughly, there's no hot in the Hebrew, but take, the idea of like one's take, one's approach. I think that's basically what Dvar means. It's like a word or a thing. It's a take. But I'm really curious to hear what that looks like in your context. And I have a question that I don't know the answer to, and I don't, and I won't have any problem if the answer is a little more limited than my vision. But when I met with one of my students that I worked with, I started, and we just sort of at random, not quite at random, I had a few Torah portions in mind that I thought he might really vibe with. We looked at them together, we explored, and I was kind of waiting to see which one energized him. We actually did not start knowing what date his event was going to be. We started just like, this is going to happen sometime after you turn 13, but it could be right when you turn 13. It could be a bunch of months later. We're going to see which Torah portion lines up with it. He ended up picking one, Bahar. It's all about the sabbatical year. It happened to be adjacent to a sabbatical year as he was doing his preparation. But what he did is he actually didn't so much give a Devar Torah. He gave his hot take, but that was sort of 4 or 5 minutes. And then it was a discussion as a group. Mm-hmm. It was a group interaction where he was 14 by the time he was doing this because COVID made things delayed. But he, as a 14-year-old, was leading a bunch of people who were mostly, 40, 50, 60. And that experience was kind of incredible to hear him respond to their thoughts in real time to create that transgenerational dynamic. So I guess I'm curious how that Devar Torah piece works. Do they get the full freedom to be like, you know what? I want this Torah portion. I want that Torah portion. Is it a little more limited? And are there different formats? Are there some Devar Torahs that are like, yeah, I'm reading a spiel to a room, and others where it's more of a discussion, and others where it's some other creative format that I haven't even thought of?
Yeah, absolutely. So Devar Torah through the Tawanga B'nai Mitzvah program is very special. I think it's my favorite part of the program. So the original format was going to be finding young Tawanga adults, past camp counselors, that we could recruit to be mentors and, kind of chavruta study partners for our students. We quickly learned, and as the program grew, that there just isn't that number of young adults we could recruit. Our program is 130 kids at max capacity at this time, and it's been filling every year. And so that means about like 60 mentors a year. And unless you want young adults to be constantly churning through and volunteering, it's not sustainable. So we went back to the, proverbial drawing board and thought about what is sustainable is the kid has their own community. The kid always comes with their own community, whatever that looks like. So what we do now is we actually ask the family to think of who from their community can be the kid's mentor, can work with their kid to be their chavruta, their study partner. Primarily, we end up working with grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins. In the past, we've also gotten in touch with camp counselors if the kid says, I really want to work with my counselor from last summer. And then I have developed a training that my team is now learning so we can all do it. We train mentors individually, one at a time. It takes about 30 minutes. And we train them how to work with a student to help write Devar Torah. And we have robust curriculum, meeting by meeting, what to do in each meeting. We have robust resources for them to find online in terms of commentary. We also have sample outlines for them to get to work with the student. And then, of course, we say, also change it, right? Mix it up. Do whatever you want to do. You're not turning this in for a grade. This is your chance to say something about Torah, right? You said it's the hot take. I say it's the teaching, right? Like, what do you want to teach us? And the other thing I say is the so what, right? Here's your Torah portion. So what? Who cares, right? Tell me why we should care about this Torah portion. That is how we work with adults to work with kids. And then they set up their own meetings with the kids. It takes about 5 sessions or so. And they go from reading the Parsha together to writing something. Our staff, our Tawanga staff, is always in the background. We're answering lots of questions to support the mentors. We're reading drafts as needed. But really, it's up to those two together, the student and their chavruta. In terms of the actual Torah portion, I am a big proponent of doing the one on the weekend of the service. I believe it's a way to connect to Jews around the world. I think that, even if a Torah portion is tricky, sometimes the best stuff comes out of sticking with it and making it work. So for me, I love to pitch, see if you can make that Torah portion from the weekend work. It connects you to global Jewry.
Sorry, to clarify, I agree with you. And we were actually choosing what date the ceremony was going to be based on which Torah portion called to him. So it still was the one that the rest of the world was doing. It's just we didn't have the date on the calendar yet. So there was no
great. I will say, and I have also been known to find topical texts that work for kids. Kid wants to learn about what does Torah say about animals? What does Torah say about environment? And I have also curated some texts for kids who are very, very driven on a particular topic, and they're welcome to write their Devar Torah about that text. And then the third option that has actually come out of the pandemic, which has been really interesting, is what was the text that was read when you turned 13? Let's say you have to postpone your simcha, or let's say you want it to be in the summer because you want it to be nice weather and you want to be outside and you want to do a nature-based service, but your birthday is in December. What was the world reading when you became bar mitzvah? And then we can go back and read that. And that's been a really beautiful way for folks to feel like they can release the exact date. We do not require kids to have the simcha close to their 13th birthday. In fact, sometimes I've found it's even better if they wait a little longer. They're more prepared. They're more confident. Sometimes they even have that why am I doing this more dialed. So that's been a really nice way to connect to their actual B Mitzvah moment when they woke up, as Dan said, and became B Mitzvah, whether they wanted to or not, right? Whether they read Torah or not. So Devar Torah is very special. And part of the mentor process is to bring in more folks, right? To say this is about you, student, but it's actually about your community. And to let this be a pivot point for someone from their family. You can imagine, I'm sure, how tickled grandparents are to be on the phone with me and say, I'm so excited to work with my grandson to become bar mitzvah. I remember when I became bar mitzvah, shubidi-bop-bop-a-doo-bop-a-da, a long time ago, and we talk about it. And they're thrilled. And so for me, now we've invited someone else into this moment, and it's become an even more full moment for the family.
The story about the Devar Torah, it brings me back again to that Isa Aaron episode, because one of the things that I learned from her in that episode was that in the early days of American bar mitzvahs, there were actually published books of Devar Torahs. And the bar mitzvah boy, this was, I think, before there were bat mitzvah girls, right? The bar mitzvah boy would come up to the front of the service and open the book and read from it the Devar Torah. It was like a pre-published Devar Torah. Now, that seems a little absurd to us today, but the fact that that was the original practice, so to speak, suggests to me that the question isn't just how do we make that more meaningful, because obviously the way to make that more meaningful is to have the kid write their own Devar Torah. So in that sense, I'm a big proponent of the evolution of that element of the ritual. What it raises for me, though, is why that's the ritual. In other words, why? So my thought is that if we know that there actually is no ritual requirement for a B mitzvah. And by the way, my hypothesis on why people are less willing to play around with it than they are with the Passover Seder is because they have internalized a message, and here I'm talking about the parents, that the stakes are very high, that if we don't do it right, the kid will not be successfully bar mitzvahed, right? In the same way that you could say, well, if we don't do the stages of the Jewish wedding correctly, they're not actually married. That actually might be the case. I mean, I don't think it is, but I mean, for a traditional mindset, you could say, well, this is a formula and it has to happen in a certain way, and what it's doing is
that
creating
being weddings. It's not the case for B Mitzvah. For weddings,
I'm saying for weddings, you could imagine that this is actually forming, that the wedding ceremony is not a recognition of the marriage. The wedding ceremony is the actual formation of this like spiritual bond, and it has to be done with a certain set of spells, right? That have to be said in a certain way, otherwise it doesn't happen. So you could see that people would say the stakes are high if we don't do the wedding the right way. Interestingly, I think a lot of people don't see it that way, and they do think that they can play around with a wedding. But there's something about the B Mitzvah that I think people have internalized the notion that if we don't do it right, it won't work, and the kid won't be B Mitzvah, and then they won't be like a real Jew or something. Now, once we poke holes in that whole argument, which I think we all here agree that is completely wrong, that first of all, it happens on your birthday no matter what. Second of all, the it isn't so clear that it's really an important thing anyway, and it certainly doesn't define whether or not you're a Jew or not, or a Jewish adult or not. And so then the question is, okay, so now that we say, okay, well, we really understand young people, right? We really understand middle grade students. They're at a certain time of their life, and they're going through various things, and they're in a transitional period between at least physiological childhood and some kind of next stage. My question would be, if we were designing this ritual from scratch, what would its components be? And would they include giving a Dvar Torah, for example? And would they include leading services? Like, that's the piece that I'm curious about. And when we think about camp, which itself is an innovation in Jewish life, and it just feels like it's possible to say, what would it look like if we did to the B Mitzvah what camps did to Jewish life? What camps really did was create a new place for Jewish childhood to take place. And I guess I wonder what it would look like if camp said, hey, we can create a new context for a B Mitzvah to take place, and a new context for a wedding to take place, and adulthood to take place. Like, I'm just sort of wondering about whether we're even not being innovative enough.
Well, I think this question that everything it's evolved into is if the seed is like rotten, that the whole plant, right? I think there have been some really interesting things that have come out of what we've asked kids to do. So Dvar Torah, I mean, you're talking to a huge Torah nerd. I would still keep. I think one of the powers, again, of Dvar Torah is to tell a young person, you can read an ancient text with a companion, with your grandfather, right? And you can say something about it. Like, you can. You don't need a degree. You don't need to be ordained. You don't even need to be a grown person yet. Let's be real. You're 13. Tomorrow I return to the 7th grade, right? That great haiku. Today I'm a man. Tomorrow I return to the 7th grade.
I heard about that's a great one.
It's wonderful.
You said that so fast. Like, I could tell that's like deep in your kishkes. Like, that was gorgeous. Yeah. I might restate it to our listeners, but yeah.
Do, please.
Today I am a man. Tomorrow I will return to the 7th grade.
And I forget the author. I feel bad. But this idea that you can read ancient texts, you can make meaning of it, and there is meaning to be made from it, and you get to have a say in where this Jewish tradition is going through what you say about it, that it's in your hands. To me, that is the power of Dvar Torah. Right? I always tell kids, do not say what you think I want you to say. That will be boring. Like, what's the point? What's the point? Say what you want to say. And some of the best Dvar Torah I've heard have been ones that have upset some people, right? Have upset some parents. I've had some parents call me and say, my kid is kind of trying to take down Breshit, the book of Genesis. They're trying to take down God or something like that. And I kind of say, okay, let them, this is their moment with Torah to stand up in front of their community and say, I'm a young Jewish adult and I have something to say about Torah. And the thing I have to say is not that we should throw it out, but this is what I'm struggling with. And so I actually think Dvar Torah is a really magical experience and a really empowering when it's phrased in this way, right? When it's phrased and like, I actually want to hear what you have to say. But in terms of where we would go if we started from scratch, I think the question is, what does it mean to be a Jewish adult? And I would say inheriting the tradition, Torah, but I would also say to be a Jewish adult, I always tell kids means to look up from our belly buttons, look out into the world, see what needs healing, and do something about it. I think that if I were to restructure it, it might be a service year. It might be a year of only community service, right? I think prayer learning and literacy is so important. I love it. I think it helps us feel connected to Jews around the world. But what does it mean to be a Jewish adult? It's to know that you're volunteered before you want to be, right? You are already volunteered to try and make the world better. It has to go back to that question. What does it mean to be a Jewish adult? Earlier
in this unit of episodes, and I actually don't remember if I kept it in the final audio or not, so apologies to listeners if you don't remember this. But in one of our interviews, I mentioned that for me, I actually think if we think that B Mitzvah is about becoming an adult, and we've talked about ways in which that may be what's happening, and we've talked about ways in which that may not be what's happening. So Dan and I have had like a little bit of a disagreement throughout this unit. Like, I think I really like that this is a thing that we do at 12 and 13, that in a society that has an issue with infantilization, with the treatment of a lot of people in society as less fully human, less fully formed than they actually are, I think empowering people at a moment that feels quote unquote too early, like erring on that side and going with 12 or 13 feels better to me than erring on the a little too late side of 16 or 18, because I actually don't think that one becomes fully formed when one is like allowed to vote or allowed to be in the army or allowed to drive even. I think there are development, and look, we could talk about developmental stuff. You've got a master's in that, like, but there is a real set of biological and intellectual developments that are happening at that age. But what I said earlier in the unit is I believe if this is about becoming a kind of adult, the way that I most experienced that in my teen years was at summer camp. It was the journey, it was the compressed journey of a lifespan. Because what happens at summer camp is you compress the journey of birth to death into the journey from whatever your first year is at camp, but often, for me, it was when I was 8 years old, to, if you stay the whole way, the next age group, and then, counselor, and then you stop going, and that's death. I mean, I am more unknown to current campers at my summer camp than I will be to people that it's been multiple generations, quote unquote, since I've been there. And that's healthy and good. But when I went from 7th grade to 8th grade and entered a new unit at summer camp, I noticed that summer that there were all of a sudden these like little younger kids that wanted to hang out with me and saw me as a kind of elder. And then when I became a counselor, I was really an adult. I had humans in my charge. Whether I was actually an adult or not, that's a whole, but I was being treated as one. So I guess I'm curious, could we see some contexts that are already happening? The journey of an 8, 9, 10-year-old through the years of camp to becoming those different latter stages. Could we actually see that as a kind of B Mitzvah? And if we did, might we have other kinds of ceremonies at the camp or in other moments that mark that? And they don't necessarily do so through Torah. I don't know, but I'm curious if that feels right from your vantage point as somebody who spends a lot of time at a summer camp. How do we look at that sort of compressed lifespan and different quote unquote life cycle moments that might just be becoming a 7th grader, becoming a 9th grader?
The compression of a life cycle during summer camp is just so real. I mean, 3 years at summer camp working on staff just feels like your whole career. I think the obvious inflection point for me at summer camp is when you switch from this is an experience for me to this is an experience I'm helping facilitate for younger campers, right? And so for us, that's the move into teen programs at camp, right? When you kind of graduate from at Camp Tawanga, the oldest unit is Chalutzim, and then you move into, we have a teen leadership institute, but then really when you move into CIT, counselor in training. And that is when we sit down with the kids and we say, listen, you are still campers, but also not, right? You now have to prioritize the younger campers' experience over your own. And before you got to choose what you were going to do during free time, et cetera, now you have to actually help the younger kids decide and then go with them, right? Like you are now facilitating this experience for someone else. To me, that is a huge inflection point in turning into like adult at camp, that it's less about the brain development, less about like really where they are. They might be 17, et cetera, still can't vote, but they understand what it means to inherit the tradition of camp and be responsible for giving other kids the camp experience. So we say to them, you loved camp as a camper? They're like, yeah, of course I loved camp as a camper. It's like, great. You are now responsible to bring that magic to someone else. And I think that's a perfect parallel, though, to B Mitzvah, even outside of camp, right? For me, to become an adult in B Mitzvah, to become B Mitzvah is not to suddenly be like, okay, I'm going to go get married and get a house and whatever. That's ridiculous, right? They're 13. But you're now responsible for like starting to inherit this tradition. Like we're starting to fill up your backpack with like your Jewish tradition and you're starting to carry it around, right? And that is what it means to me to like open the door to B Mitzvah. It's not that like, boom, you're an adult. Congratulations. Good luck. It's that like, okay, here's your backpack, right? A great camp metaphor. You're starting to inherit this. And from now on, you're inheriting this. And from now on, you have to start teaching the younger kids. And I think at camp, that's very obviously CIT for kids, but even more so when folks are on staff.
So I'm curious, then I think that's helpful in terms of like what I'm trying to get at. Like I'm thinking like if a kid's Jewish life is camp, then you could imagine that the B Mitzvah ceremony, right, becomes some kind of version of the pre-enactment of what it is to become a camp counselor, a CIT, a few years before that actually happens, when you're 12 or 13, what would that look like? Because essentially that's what we're doing with like synagogue stuff. You lead some prayers, read a little Torah, say a Dvar Torah. What would that look like? So that, you know, and I think why I feel like that's an anomalous way to mark this occasion is because the adult life of most of these kids will not be as a synagogue goer. It will also not be as a camp goer because they're going to age out of it. So I'm not sure. I'm not saying that's the solution because really the solution involves figuring out what they are going to do when they're an adult and then trying to figure out what it looks like to do a 13-year-old version of that. But at least in terms of somebody who goes to camp regularly, their current life at least is one that is going to be at camp. And I'm just wondering if, you know, back to my question of like, how would we design it if we were designing it from scratch? How would we design the ritual of the camper becoming, you know, moving through the liminal space from being a camper to a not yet counselor, but they're on the road. And so they're going to have a ceremony that somehow marks that.
The first thought that comes to mind is it would be cohort based for sure. So going back to what Lex said about having this more individual experience, but there's that feeling of, right, my bunk is graduating, right? Like my entire rookie year, right? My cohort is graduating. And I think it's that turnover, that Lador Vador, that generation. And I think if we were to design that up at camp, I think there could be I think actually, you know, this conversation is inspiring me a little bit to think, how could we ritualize that last year of camp as yes, this sort of death, but also the sort of rebirth, right? You're now becoming this new stage of life at camp, right? And you are carrying the torch, and maybe you would, right, manifest it in some sort of passing down of the water bottle instead of the Torah or something like very sweet like that. Like, what does it mean to really hold the magic of camp?
I love the way you're talking about the transition from camper to CIT. For me, like there really is already at many summer camps a natural aging process. And like when I said before that when I was at like 8th grade, I started to have younger campers that were like tugging on my shirt. Like I was not a cool kid. It's not like I was some exception and, I was one of the ones that the little kids wanted to hang out with. No, I was like less of that than many. But I think most 8th, 9th graders have like somebody a few years younger that's in the basketball hug, the basketball activity with them and like wants to hang out with you, or in the arts and crafts and wants to hang out. Like most people have somebody like that. And it's just, it happens. Now, is it formalized? Do we like mark it as a like, Lex and this younger camper are like have some kind of connection? No, I don't think we do. I think we could on a general recognition of, you're at this new stage. We're going to have a collective recognition as a camp that like being an 8th or 9th grade camper, it's not just that you happen to mentor some of the younger kids. We want to see that as a feature. We're going to, the first week of camp, we're going to have a thing that's like, look in front of you. These are like all the current 8th graders. And you might remember them as little kids if you're one of the counselors, but they're not the little kids anymore. And now if you're one of the younger campers, like you might be in some activities with these folks and like see what you can learn from that. Like that, it wouldn't take a whole lot. I think it's already there. The chavruta piece, this is an unsmooth segue. I really want to sit with the ways in which your program marks this experience as not just about the 13-year-old, the 12-year-old themselves. I think that is a huge credit to you. It is so important with all life cycle events. There's this norm out there where people say like, it's all about you, the two people getting married, and not about anybody else. I do think end of the day, it is most about the two spouses getting married, but it is also about parents. It is also about friends even. Like the people that are there, they're not just watching your thing. And with the B Mitzvah, that's so true too. And it's especially true given that we live in a world where many parents themselves had crummy B Mitzvah experiences. And so talk to us about that adult learning process. I know that it's not just that they learn a little, like they have that 7-part structure as parents that they're immersed in. And you've sort of spread the tentacles even farther so that it could be a grandparent or an uncle or an aunt or a camp counselor. So talk to us about the ways in which you actually form something that is not just for the B Mitzvah person, but for the others that are part of their life.
Yeah, so there's a lot of reasons we've grown the program in this direction. One is really Toowoomba is very cooperatively focused. Like it's the second rung of our mission statement that this is really about the collective. It is the first rung of our mission is about the individual, but the second is about the collective. And so built into the fabric of Toowoomba really is the community approach. My bat mitzvah, I remember my grandmother had like 3 tables of friends at my bat mitzvah. And my mother was like, yeah, I mean, this is partly for your grandmother, like deal with it a little bit. But that's how my mother's approach was. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. And I definitely felt like it was part of it. And then when I got married, me and my wife knew it wasn't about us. It was about, my dad has been ill for many years. We wanted him to be able to dance at our wedding. And so we moved up the date. We planned a wedding in 4 months. So he would be as well as he could be. So I think deeply ingrained in me and in the culture of Toowoomba is this sense of like decentering the individual, but also honoring the individual, like kind of balancing, right? Balancing the community with the individual, kind of fight back against this like me American culture, right? And so on the one hand, Toowoomba is very customizable, but it's also, we're trying to kick it old school a little bit. So it's about the family. And I tell the families that this is a family program. We've kind of lured you here under false pretenses that this is about your kid, but it's actually about all of you. So the parent learning, it serves multiple functions. One is to make sure all parents who are Jewish or not are really included. I never assume who is in the Zoom room or in the physical room. And we're always wanting to make sure everyone feels included on this process. I want them to know what's happening during the service. I don't want them to be a guest at their service. I want them to be part of their service. And so the lessons are some just literacy, right? Like what is the prayer service? We call it the anatomy of the prayer service. And some are more workshop-y. One thing we've really elevated is the parent blessing. And I try and make this really sacred for parents. So we talk about the origins of B Mitzvah. And in my research, we find one of the earliest notions of B Mitzvah is the blessing the dad says. I think this comes from Talmud. Thank you, God, for releasing me from the responsibility of this boy, is like one of the earliest texts we have about ritualizing B Mitzvah. And so I tell parents that maybe one of the earliest things we had was a parent blessing. Take seriously this parent blessing, not as a last minute speech, right? But as like a well thought out, what do I want to wish for my kid on this day? How is my role? What do I have to prepare for this day, right? So parents are expected to prepare something that shouldn't be a last minute thing. They should really think about it. So they come to the workshop for that. With the Mitzvah project, we ask kids to complete an 18-hour community service project in their second year. They get a lot of support, but we also have a lesson for the parents. How do you support your kid in their Mitzvah project? Like we really want parents to feel like they are well equipped for supporting their kid and it's not an afterthought. And then in terms of the ceremony design itself, obviously, folks work with contracted service leaders, but we are there to help them with their service outline as much as they would like. And we're always encouraging them to find places in the service to honor someone. So whether it's opening the ark, closing the ark, presenting the talit, etc., we try and fill up the service with as many family members and community members as possible to kind of give call outs, right? So everyone feels like this is like their day, like everyone has to have a lift. So I would say any place we can bring in someone else, I want to. What if we saw this day as a day for the community and the reason we're gathering is the kid? And that's great and wonderful. And we're honoring the kid. But like the B Mitzvah is the pivot point for everyone in the community. Everyone changes after that day. I hope it takes some of the pressure off the kid as well, maybe a little bit, that like, yes, we're gathering for you, but actually today is not even all about you. Like today is about your family.
So I have one final question, and it relates to a character from Saturday Night Live. Vanessa Bayer played this character that I think the name was just Bar Mitzvah Boy. And she was this hilariously stereotypical bar mitzvah speech giver. And she would be asked questions by Seth Meyers on Weekend Update on Saturday Night Live. And she would start with like, in this week's Torah portion, blah, 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 and she'd talk like that, and she'd make like corny jokes about her brother Ethan in the way that B Mitzvah kids always make little jokes about their siblings. It's like making fun of all the cliches of B Mitzvah speeches. And my question to close out is 100 years from now, climate change, thankfully, has not destroyed the earth. We still exist, and there is still some form of Saturday Night Live. And there is a character that is making fun of what a typical B Mitzvah is like. But we have achieved success. We have made B Mitzvah more like Tawanga. We have made it what it should be in the world. What does the 100 years from now Vanessa Bayer character say differently? What would that version of like a 13-year-old that we like the ceremony that they represent? They're not just doing stuff by rote, making the lame, corny jokes. What would that character embody?
I'm laughing because I'm thinking about just like some sort of assumption that like no one believes in God anymore. Something that's like despite what God said in the Torah, or like we all recognize that God, or that we all use she pronouns for God, or so like that, like her or God, we say goddess or something like that, or that everyone's an anarchist. I don't know, something like that. I could see 100 years from now, it's goddess, not God. It's if should you believe in goddess? Who knows?
Thank you so much, Meg Adler, for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Oh, thank you so much for having me and for your work.
And thanks so much to all of you out there for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and we hope that you'll continue on with us into our next few weeks' conversations on the B Mitzvah. Another thing that we hope that you'll do is, if you're listening to this episode on the day of its release, that's Friday, May 26th, or the morning of Saturday, May 27th, we hope that you'll head over to Shavuot Live, which is happening right now, if it's between noon Eastern on the 26th of May 2023 and 11:59 a.m. Eastern on Saturday, May 27th. You should head over to bit.ly/Shavuot23, that's SHAVUOT 23, and join Shavuot Live, our 24-hour extravaganza that Dan mentioned at the top. We hope to see you there. We hope we've already seen you there, and this is, an interlude that you're listening to in the midst of a great day of learning at Shavuot Live. Also, if you're listening to this after the 27th of May 2023, we hope that you'll check out the recording of it. You did not necessarily have to miss eternally our Shavuot Live events. You can always watch the recording afterwards. So head to judaismunbound.com/Shavuot23 and you will be able to access that. Starting a few days after the event occurs, we'll have the recording up. We also want to close this episode by encouraging you to be in touch with us, and there are a wide variety of ways for you to do that. You can head to our Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram handles. All of those are at Judaism Unbound. You can email us at dan@JudaismUnbound.com or lex@JudaismUnbound.com. All of those are super encouraged. If you've got questions, thoughts, visions, ideas, all of those, send them our way. We love schmoozing with listeners about this episode or about other recent work of ours on the podcast or otherwise. So we appreciate you listening. We hope that if you are able, you'll head to JudaismUnbound.com/donate and make a monthly recurring donation or a one-time gift, which goes a long way towards ensuring our continued ability to do this work. And it's also a great way to honor Shavuot Live if you attended. It's, of course, a fully free event, but we do appreciate when we are able to channel it towards bringing in a little bit of fundraising for our organization. But we hope you've enjoyed this conversation. We hope you had or are having an amazing Shavuot. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.